70% of Israelis don't want aid to go into Gaza until the hostages are released. So when we talk about this hostage deal, that comes into the back of my mind all the time. There's a lot of pressure on the Netanyahu government to get a deal done.
Now, the International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to allow unimpeded access of food aid into Gaza. Now, this comes after the UN's most senior human rights official, Volker Turk, warned starvation was being used as a weapon of war in Gaza and could amount to a war crime. Here's a bit of what he had to say in an interview with the BBC.
Look, when it comes to humanitarian assistance, let's be clear. Israel is an occupying power and has an obligation to provide humanitarian assistance. And if that humanitarian assistance does not come in the scale, speed and predictability that is required, yes, very serious questions are raised.
That's Volker Turk. Now let's talk to Zach Anders, video journalist who is outside Haifa in Israel. Hello to you, Zach.
Hi, John.
Welcome back to the programme. Should we talk about the International Court first? They have unanimously ruled that there is not just a risk of famine in Gaza, but it is setting in. And they say their order is that Israel now allows aid in without impediment. Has there been any reaction to this in Israel?
There has, and it's consistent. The Israelis will continue to tell you that they're not the ones that are stopping any aid from getting into the Gaza Strip, that they are actually facilitating the lion's share of the aid that is going through the crossings by truck. But they lift their hands up and they say the moment that it enters the Gaza Strip, it's out of our control. It's supposed to be UNRWA, the United Nations relief agency, that takes care of distributing this aid that comes in off the trucks. And then they'll tell you that the majority of this aid is being stolen by Hamas and never gets to the Palestinian people, the Gazans that are there. There's really loose connections. The evidence that they're supplying does not always add up. They'll provide, and they have over the course of this conflict, several videos that show what appears to be these trucks being stolen, but with no Western journalists, no journalists able to get into the Gaza Strip, none of this can be verified. So,
no, I mean there are
difficult.
Indeed. I mean there are, Zach, multiple reports from multiple sources, aid agencies, and so on, who say the checks that have been taken on those lorries delivering aid into Gaza have been such that the aid hasn't been able to get through. It's been queuing up, waiting to get in.
I think all of this is too predicated on the idea of this aid in the current format of what's happening on the ground, this aid trying to make its way north from these crossings in the south by truck. Everything that I've been told, and even just by talking to some of the soldiers that have fought in Gaza, it would be nearly impossible for this to work at scale if there wasn't a ceasefire in place. For aid to be able to maneuver and move to some of these places, especially north in Gaza City, where there's still a considerable amount of people and that's where the most acute risk for what the UN says, the most acute risk for famine and hunger for that population in the northern Gaza Strip. It's going to be very difficult to do that in an active war zone. There needs to be a ceasefire in place, and I think that's everything we're hearing out of these relief agencies and nonprofits. They're saying it's going to be impossible for us to move aid, even if we're the ones that coordinate that task, if we're doing so in an active battlefield.
Right. Let's talk then about the diplomacy, because the idea of a meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli leader, and President Joe Biden, well, Netanyahu took that off the table after America abstained on that UN vote calling for a ceasefire. Where are we with that engagement now? Is there any sign of it reviving?
So there's some motion today that potentially they could be sending another delegation back to Doha to continue these talks. The latest was that Hamas rejected a deal that apparently Israel had made several major concessions and agreed to some of Hamas's demands. Again, the red line that we're seeing is that Hamas wants a complete withdrawal of the Gaza Strip, which tacitly would give them the ability to survive. Yeah. Israel saying, no, we're going to completely eliminate Hamas, and that's that's the end war goal. I should mention too that there's polling data when we're talking about the public atmosphere in Israel that 70% of Israelis don't want aid to go into Gaza until the hostages are released. So when we talk about this hostage deal, that comes into the back of my mind all the time. There's a lot of pressure on the Netanyahu government to get a deal done. We see arrests last night in central Tel Aviv at protests that are taking place. There's a protest every night demanding that the hostages be released. The hostage families continue to meet with Netanyahu daily. But it's been so long now, day 175, I believe, 174 of this conflict. And we're still seeing this tug of war taking place and no real results.
Okay, we may have lost the line there to Zach just at the last, but we certainly got the thrust of, more than the thrust of what Zach was telling us. Zach Anders, if you can hear me, thank you as always so much for keeping us up to date on that story.